Agape je u ranom hrišćanstvu bila trpeza na kojoj je svako bio dobrodošao. Ovaj davni običaj postao je vremenom simbol univerzalne hrišćanske ljubavi. I danas se zna. Ko veruje da nam je samo ljubav potrebna, njegova je trpeza agape.
Poštovani gledalci, dobroveče. Gledate emisiju Agape. Ovo je specijalno izdanje koje se snima u Rimu i velika mi je čast da razgovaramo sa doktorkom Margaret Barker. Ona je čuveni proučavalac Biblije. Takođe je i sveštenik u metodističkoj crkvi i ona je veoma poznata kao osoba koja je zapravo ustanovila teologiju hrama i neki čak misle da to njeno izučavanje može da stvori itekako veliki uticaj u biblijskoj teologiji. Gospođo Barker, dobroveče i dobrodošli u serijal Agape.
Thank you.
Vi ste najznačajnija ličnost kada je u pitanju teologija hrama. Neki vas nazivaju i majkom teologije hrama. Pa ako možete da nam kažete šta je zapravo teologija hrama, zašto je ona važna da se izučava i kako biste uopšte predstavili ne samo stručnjacima, već i običnom svetu?
Temple theology is very different from, I think, all other approaches to Bible study because it centers on the temple. When I was a student many years ago, it occurred to me that the great thing that was missing from what we were studying was any study of the actual world of the temple. Not what it looked like or what the priests were paid, but what they actually thought, what was actually going on. And this seemed to me a big gap, a big hole in our study of the Bible. And so, because nothing else was being done in this area, I decided to begin as a student, really, investigating for myself. And that investigation has taken me the rest of my life, and it's been very satisfying. So why should people study temple theology? Well, I think for me it has illuminated what Christianity means more than anything else I have learned, including all the studies I did at university. So I would love to have other people to share what I've discovered.
Kako ste se uopšte zainteresovali za to polje teologije hrama i da li ste imali neke izvore, da kažemo neku prethodnicu koja vam je služila za proučavanje ove ovako zanimljive teologije?
I didn't know at the time of anyone else who had done this sort of thing, and I went simply because it interested me, and I was in the happy position. I had learnt quite a lot of Hebrew before I went to university, and so I didn't have to spend my time learning Hebrew and Greek. I'd also learnt Greek, so I had a lot of spare time compared with my fellow students, and I was able to take advantage of the wonderful libraries, and I was able just to work on my own, only at a student level. It was a very basic level, as I now realise, but it laid the foundations for what I was doing for the rest of my academic life. It was also a very exciting time because when I was a student there were a lot of new materials coming available. We had the Dead Sea Scrolls just about becoming available. We had all the new materials from Nag Hammadi in Egypt, the Gnostic texts. This was very exciting. Only a few of those were available, but more and more came to light, and so there was all that material to explore. And then there was the work that has been going on ever since of translating into English many other old books, treasures of the Christian Church that had been preserved in languages such as Slavonic, Ethiopic, indeed Syriac. All these things were suddenly available, and we had a huge literary context in which to read the Bible stories, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it seemed to me that there was a huge amount here that could illuminate where Christianity really had its roots. And I soon realized that the roots of Christianity lay in the world of the temple, not the second temple, the temple that Jesus actually knew, but in the original temple of Solomon, which had been destroyed 400 years before the time of Jesus. Not only the building, but also the worldview, the teachings and so forth, they'd all become changed over the centuries, and much that was the origin of Christianity, the roots of Christianity, the idea about the Messiah, all these things which are so basic, they had been almost lost. And I have had many happy years trying to find them again.
Možete li nam reći razliku između teologije prvog hrama i teologije drugog hrama?
That question would take a very long time to answer. The first one is that the first temple focused on the anointed king. There was a king from the house of David in Jerusalem. He was anointed, and he was a sacral king. He was believed to be a divine figure. He was believed to be the presence of the Lord on earth in human form. And the relevance of that for Christianity, of course, is very obvious, that the people of the first temple did believe it was possible for the Lord to be on earth in human form, and the Christians regarded the temple as almost a parable or a foreshadowing of the things that Jesus fulfilled. And so this was the first and most obvious thing in the first temple. And then there were other things. Something I discovered quite by surprise, in fact I was very surprised to discover it, was that there was a very important female figure in the first temple. And she was a mother figure in heaven, she was a queen figure. And I was brought up as a very strict Protestant, and I began to see in this lady in the first temple, I was beginning to see, this is where Mary came from. And that to me, as a Protestant, was a complete shock, I have to say. But I pursued this, and this has become another major part of my studies, looking at how the great titles for Mary, the great hymns to Mary, all the things which I had thought were very strange and as a Protestant I had thought were very wrong, and I suddenly found they had deep, deep roots in the temple and in the Bible.
Možete li nam malo više objasniti ko je zapravo Lady ili mudrost Božja ili Sofija?
Yes. Now, the lady of the temple, I call her the lady because that is just one of the titles that she has in the Old Testament. She's known as the Great Lady, the Gevira in Hebrew, and she was represented on earth as the mother of the king in Jerusalem. And so the queen in Jerusalem was not the king's wife, it was the king's mother. And so you had the two people ruling, the mother and the son. And she had many titles, as all monarchs have many titles and deities have many titles. And you have to identify the lady's title. She was known as Wisdom, she was known as the Spirit or the Holy Spirit, she was known as the Queen of Heaven, she was known, the Great Lady, she was known as Deborah, which is interesting. She was symbolized by the bee who makes honey to feed her children, and so her wise teaching was described as honey. Many, many of these titles that came through. Sophia is the Greek translation of her Hebrew name, Chokhmah. But because she is a divine being, sometimes she's given her name in a plural form. And that doesn't mean there was lots of her, it means that she was a very special person. So she's called, at the beginning of the book of Proverbs, for example, she's called Chokhmot, which means that she is she's the divine wisdom, and she pours out her spirit on her children. So the lady has many, many titles. The one that occurs a lot in the Hebrew scriptures In the Hebrew scriptures it has the form Asherah, which in fact was a change made by later scribes because they didn't want this lady to be remembered. And her original name, which you can see on inscriptions in pottery and in, written on rocks, things that the editors of the Bible didn't change. There you can see that her name was Ashratah, and that means the one who makes you happy or the one who keeps you on the straight path. So she's the guide. She is the one who shows you the way. So she has many, many titles, and I'm sure I shall discover more. But each one of them I was able to trace through into for example, the Akathist hymn. I think I have now identified all the titles in that hymn as going back to this Lady of the Temple, which is very exciting.
U jednom od vaših tekstova pročitao sam da je u jednom istorijskom trenutku došlo do promene između teologija mudrosti i da na pozornicu, da tako kažemo, izlazi teologija koju personifikuje knjiga zakona. Zašto je do toga došlo, po vašem mišljenju, i kada?
Yes, there certainly was at some stage in the history of Jerusalem, and maybe the wider country round about, but certainly in Jerusalem, which was the cultural centre, there had been over perhaps 100 years, maybe a bit more, there had been the beginnings of a revolutionary movement. And it started perhaps 750 BC, something like that. And it had success, and then it failed, and then success. It finally succeeded in the year 623 BC, when there was a very young king on the throne. His name was Josiah. He was only really a boy. And I suspect he was manipulated, he was used by these revolutionary forces. And in his reign there was a huge purge of the temple, quite like the Reformation in Northern Europe. The king who made all the changes in England, Edward VI, I discovered he modelled himself on this young King Josiah. And when I look at the damage done to the old churches in England, I can imagine that this was the sort of thing that happened in 623 BC in Jerusalem and in the area round about. And there was this cultural revolution. And the people who were loyal to the king, the revolutionaries who had won, they made life very difficult for the people of the older faith. And so many of them fled as exiles. Many of them had left Jerusalem even before the Babylonian army came and actually conquered Jerusalem. So they were religious refugees rather than political refugees. And then when 70 years or so later, a group came back to rebuild the temple. They built a second temple, but their world was the world of the revolutionaries, not the older faith. And so for the 500 years or so before the time of Jesus, there were the people who were the elite, the people who were the scribes, the people who were copying out the ancient texts. These people were copying them out and leaving out of the texts things which they thought were blasphemous, things which were the remains of this older faith that they thought really should have, been left behind by now. And so the Old Testament that we have and the Hebrew text that it's translated from, that actually represents the religion of Jerusalem after the Cultural Revolution. And we have to try and get behind the work of those scribes and find what we can that was left of the original temple. And that's what I've been doing.
Vi ste veoma dobar poznavalac hebrejskog jezika. Poznato je da u hebrejskom jeziku nema samoglasnika i dovoljno je promeniti samo jedno slovo i možemo dobiti potpuno drugačije značenje. Koliko je važno da Bibliju izučavamo na originalnom tekstu?
Those are some very, very big questions. First of all, when you read any text in translation, you are certainly reading the translator's opinions, because so often when you are dealing, for example, with Hebrew, you will find a word that has many different meanings, many different shades of meaning, and the translator into English, for example, has to choose only one of those. When you have chosen only one, then you have removed all the other nuances, the shades of meaning, all the other things that perhaps were in the mind of the original writer. So when you translate a text, you actually make it much poorer and much thinner. That's the first problem with Hebrew. The second problem is that certainly if you're translating Hebrew into a language like English, which has a completely different structure, you lose such a lot of the actual meaning. It's not just translating the words. You could put it through a machine to translate the words. You have to try to translate what it's actually about. You have to get the feel of it. And so when you do Bible study using a translation, you must always be aware that that is a very poor substitute for studying the Hebrew, or in the New Testament, studying the Greek. That said, it is much better to study in your own language than not to study at all. But be aware that the Hebrew is much richer than the Old Testament translation. And then when you're reading the Hebrew, you can see other things about the style of the writers, which was very important. For example, they used a lot of play on the sound of words. In Hebrew, they would find two words that sounded the same, and if they wanted you to remember the point they were making, what they were saying, they would use these two words that sounded similar. Now, when you translate into another language, that similar sound has gone, and so it no longer becomes so easy to remember exactly what they said. And so there are all sorts of things that you lose if you don't study the Bible in the original languages.
Zanimljivo je bilo vaše zapažanje da uobičajeno nazivamo Isusa Hrista Isusom Nazarećaninom. Međutim, kada ste se vratili korenima teh reči i upravo jednim malim promenom slova, dobija se jedno potpuno novo značenje. Možete li nam reći do kojih zaključaka ste došli?
Yes, I can indeed. One of the ways that the Hebrew tradition helped people remember was because we were with sounds of words. And we usually think of Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth, but there was another word that sounded very similar. And in Hebrew, this is the verb natsar, and that actually means somebody who guards or protects or indeed keeps secret. And if you read very carefully the Gospel of John, you will find he says that the notice on Jesus' cross doesn't say Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. What John writes is Jesus the Nazorios, not Nazarenos. He doesn't say Jesus of Nazareth. He says Jesus Nazorios, Jesus the preserver, the guardian, or maybe the keeper of secrets. And this raises a very big question for the Christians. What was it that Jesus was guarding, preserving? What secrets was he teaching? Now we know in the Gospels, even in the public Gospels, we have places like Jesus talking to his disciples and saying, "To you given the secrets of the kingdom of heaven." What were these secrets? That's a very big question. But if we look at the tradition of the temple, there was a tradition that the high priests, the elite of the temple, guarded certain sacred teachings. And the early Christians, the first evidence we have of this is written by a Christian bishop in about the year 100, Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch. And he says, Jesus, the great high priest, he is the guardian of these secrets. And so the Christians claimed to have the teaching of the original high priests. They claimed to be passing on and giving to a much wider group of people the sacred teaching of the high priests. Now, the book of Hebrews in the New Testament identifies Jesus very clearly. We have a great high priest, Hebrews chapter 4. And there are other sayings attributed to Jesus that are not written in the New Testament, but widely known amongst the early Christians. And one of these sayings was, keep my mysteries, keep my sacred teachings, keep my mysteries for the children of my house. In other words, there were mysteries, secret teachings, important teachings that could only be given to people who were already members of his church. They were the children of his house. And if you trace these secret teachings through, you'll find that they are teachings about the meaning of the Eucharist, the meaning of the bread and the wine, that mystery that is beyond words. The real meaning of that is not set out anywhere in the New Testament. The prayers that are used in the liturgy with the consecration, they're not in the New Testament. Where do they come from? And if you read the writings, for example, of St. Basil the Great, that's the middle of the 4th century, he says, yes, all this comes through that secret tradition which the apostles never wrote down. It was passed on, it was never written down, it was never made public. And this comes through from the old tradition of the temple quite clearly. And the fact that Jesus is saying about this isn't even in the New Testament. Very important indeed. Now, this raises very big questions for Protestants like me, because we were brought up to believe that if you can't find it in the Bible, you don't believe it. And it came as a big shock to me to discover that the most important, the most sacred mysteries are not written in the Bible to protect them from being taken by people who do not understand them and mocking them and destroying them, misinterpreting them. And this is a huge shock to someone from a Protestant background. But I can now see the logic of this, and I can see how all this comes through from temple tradition and the tradition of the high priesthood. On the other hand, there's bad news for the traditional churches as well. The Protestants have the bad news that it's not all in the Bible. The traditional churches have the bad news that everybody, under the Christian regime, everybody is a priest. So you don't get ordained separately as a priest. When you become a Christian, you are marked with the sign of a cross. That's a sign that you are a priest. So there's bad news for everybody, but it's very exciting. Very, very exciting.
Zašto je po vašem mišljenju Jovanovo evanđelje potpuno različito od ostala tri?
That is one of the really big questions in New Testament scholarship. Because if you read the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, you have a picture of Jesus, and it's more or less the same in all three. There are slight differences, but it's more or less the same. When you get to John's Gospel, Jesus is a very different figure. He's a mysterious figure. He says he's come from heaven, he has visions, all these strange things. Is this something that was made up later when they were busy trying to transform him into a Greek god or something like that? This is the sort of idea that's been discussed in 20th century biblical scholarship, serious biblical scholarship. Why? Why is this so different? And then you look at who it is who wrote the Gospels. You see, Mark was not one of Jesus's group of 12. He was a friend of St. Peter, so he gets memories from Peter. Luke certainly wasn't one of the 12 apostles. He learns about Christianity later. Matthew might have been one of the apostles, we're not sure. But John claims to have been Jesus's closest friend. So if we say, oh, John's Gospel is wrong, he doesn't give us a true picture of Jesus, we're making a very silly mistake. It may be that John knew Jesus best of all, and he tried in his Gospel to give us a little bit of the person he knew and the teachings he gave and the problems he had when discussing theology with contemporary Jews. So John's Gospel is hugely important, but you can't say study John first because it's the most difficult one. And that gives us a problem. So if you study an easy Gospel like Luke, that's wonderful, that gives you the stories, and then you have to make this big leap to studying John, and that can be very, very difficult indeed.
Kada biraš vodu, obrati pažnju na njen sastav. Naša srpska arteška voda ima idealnu strukturu molekula. Dolazi do svake ćelije, hraneći je mineralima i kiseonikom, čime je oslobađa od toksina. Zbog uravnotežene koncentracije minerala, čuva energiju ćelije i povećava njenu vitalnost. Kada piješ ovu vodu, svojim ćelijama daješ mogućnost za idealan rad tokom metaboličkih procesa i zbog toga ti je svaka tvoja ćelija zahvalna. Kada svaka ćelija kaže da. Voda. Kvalitet potvrdio Medicinski fakultet u Beogradu.
Knjiga Agape-Antologija Aleksandra Gajšeka može se kupiti u svim prodavnicama Srpske pravoslavne crkve, kao i knjižarama Delfi i Vulkan. Povodom 10 godina serijala, 12 izabranih razgovora, Patrijarh Pavle, Jerotić, Tucić, Kusturica, Kovačević, Bećković, Mitropolit Porfirije, Cane, Točak, Genčić, Bilbija, Trebješanin, Toševski, Abramović. Idealan praznični dar. Agape-Antologija.
Istanbul 4 dana 149 eura, London 5 dana 299 eura, Moskva i Sankt Peterburg 8 dana 399 eura, Tajland 12 dana 559 eura, Sveta zemlja i mistični Jordan 10 dana 699 eura, Kina 13 dana 899 eura. Budite putnik agencije Putnik Travel. Nastavak tradicije kvaliteta duge 95 godina.
U prodaji je knjiga Agape-Antologija 2, novih 12 razgovora ovog kultnog serijala. Vladeta Jerotić, Radovan Bigović, Mitropolit Porfirije, Rambo Amadeus, Jovan Čirilov, Sanja Domazet, Zoran Milivojević, Raša Popov, Timoti John Bajford, Svetomir Bojanin, Lazar Trifunović, Dina Čolić, Bojan Jovanović i Dejan Raković. Agape-Antologija 2.
Partner emisije Agape, Mokrogorska škola menadžmenta, upravljačke veštine u službi boljeg društva. Vi niste samo, da kažemo, teolog, već ste lično i vernik, konkretno hrišćanka. Kako vidite taj odnos između ličnog doživljaja Boga i u kakvoj je on vezi sa naučnim izučavanjem?
Well, yes, I am a Christian and I am a preacher within a Protestant church. I'm a Methodist preacher in England. I wouldn't be doing this research if I didn't think it illuminated and added to my knowledge of the faith. And so the results of my research, even the smallest little bits of them, I do use when I'm preaching, only very gently, and I never suggest anything when I'm preaching that is controversial, anything like that. But I found that congregations who hear this are much helped by it, and that is a good thing. It is as though they have an instinctive recognition that this makes sense and this is right. And so when I pursue my research, I always say to myself, is this relevant? Is this illuminating and helping what I am trying to do? Now, a lot of biblical study that is done at the moment, academic biblical study, is not actually relevant to the life of a church or a faith community. It is certainly not relevant to the task of preaching and nourishing and feeding a community of Christians. And this is a big problem. Now, a lot of the work done in the universities is very interesting indeed. All sorts of social, scientific, linguistic, archaeological, all sorts of other disciplines, and they are fascinating. But they are of very little use to the business of actually teaching the faith, feeding the congregations, and actually making the Christian worldview relevant to the world we live in today. And this is what is so important. And I greatly fear that we are going to become so clever from university studies that we become no use. And that's very bad. So we do have, I think, to bring serious scholarship back into an area where it can be of use to the churches. I cannot imagine any company, any business, having a product that was no use to the people who wanted to use it. It simply wouldn't stay in business. And this is the situation we are facing in many, many areas of biblical study now. Fascinating, very interesting, but not a lot of use.
Vaše izučavanje Biblije je radikalno drugačije od uobičajenog teološkog pristupa. Da li imate neke reakcije vaših kolega i kako uopšte duhovni lideri gledaju na vaša istraživanja?
I have an interesting relationship with all sorts of other scholars. I have to say biblical scholars in England, particularly Old Testament scholars with whom I associate most, have many very dear friends. And we disagree on some things, but when I need help, professional, technical help, anything like that, they are always there for me, and I love them dearly. That said, what I am doing is very different from anything that they do. They can't in many cases understand what I'm doing or even why I'm doing it, but there we go. Now, in the religious communities, I have a mixed reception. I find some Protestant communities are very worried about what I'm doing and sometimes become almost hostile because I am doing something with the Bible, because it's firmly Bible-based. I'm doing something with the Bible that they haven't done, and they feel threatened. And some of the things that I have discovered about the temple actually challenge some of the basic teachings of some elements of the Protestants. Now, the Protestants say we are Bible-based, which is true. We, and I am a Protestant, we are Bible-based. Church leaders have various reactions. My Protestant friends, some of them are intrigued, some are worried and even hostile because I'm doing something with the Bible that they haven't done and they don't like. I think the crucial point for me is that I disagree with them over the idea of atonement, how we understand the crucial business of atonement. And the temple tradition shows clearly that atonement is healing and self-sacrifice. It's not this idea of appeasing an angry God. And the point of the Christian acceptance of temple atonement is that it emphasizes that this was the real thing. There was no substitute, no substitution. And so there are a group of Protestants, those who hold the atonement theory, which they call penal substitution, with whom I am in absolute opposition because I think that is not biblical. And here, of course, I'm going to make a lot of people very worried, but I'm very happy to discuss this with them. I'm very happy to preach this, and I preach this regularly on Good Friday. I preach every Good Friday to a congregation somewhere in my home area. And they have reacted in an incredible way to realizing that the meaning of Good Friday is not that horrible, appeasing and angry God that some of them learnt about in their childhood. And it is much more edifying, I think. I also think it's much more biblical. But that is something that will be years, we shall be years debating. I'm happy to debate it with anyone, and I challenge any of my Protestant brothers and sisters to find a biblical basis for penal substitution.
Da li je teologija hrama važna samo hrišćanima ili može da bude interesantna i ostalim dvema monoteističkim religijama, judaizmu i islamu?
Well, now this is a very interesting question. I have many Jewish friends and we talk, but we tend not to talk about theology. We tend to talk about the text and the transmission of the text and exciting things in the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. I once had a very interesting reaction from a rabbi in London who was teaching at the time at Heathrop College, the Catholic college. And I did a little presentation about the temple, and he just said to me, "Thank you for giving us back our temple." And I thought that was so lovely. That wasn't a scholarly remark, that was from the heart. So I think there is at least one rabbi in England who is happy with what I'm doing. I think there are a lot of issues that worry the Jewish community at the moment, those who are observant and practicing Jews, and I think many of these are the issues raised by finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, because those showed that the sacred Hebrew text on which their lives focus and so forth and center was actually changed. And this is something that is very, very difficult for them, and I can understand it. And in some cases changed quite dramatically around the time of the origin of Christianity. And this, I think, is something that we're going to have to explore. At the moment we just say, well, there are two versions of some texts, and the Jews had one and the Christians had another, for example Isaiah. But the issues are in fact more difficult than that, because how is it that the Christian version of, say, Isaiah, or the version that the Christians used of Isaiah, is so different at critical points in the text? And so the Hebrew text from which our Old Testament is translated is not the Hebrew text that the first Christians would have used for their prophecies of Jesus. And so Christians can look for these prophecies in the Hebrew Old Testament and say they're not there. Before we had the evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the tendency was to say, well, the Christians made up a few extra prophecies and this kind. They didn't. What happened was they had a version of the Hebrew text that had those prophecies in it, and we now only have evidence for that among the Dead Sea Scrolls. All the other variant forms of the text were destroyed. Now we do know, and this is from Jewish sources, that they destroyed the scrolls, the sacred scrolls of the Christians, the minim, the heretics as they called them. So this is a very, very difficult area, and it's one for text scholars to work on, but they have to work honestly. And if you look at some of, for example, the transcriptions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I can think of one particular example in Isaiah chapter 7, where the scroll is not transcribed accurately, and so the transcription looks as though it is for the later Hebrew text, and in fact it's different by one crucial letter. But you only see that if you look at the photographs. So you have to have absolute honesty in scholarship, and sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it hurts a lot. I mean, I had to lose my Protestant baggage about everything that is true is in the Bible, and I realized that it wasn't. And there are lots and lots of things that you do have to be prepared to sacrifice in your searching for truth.
Kako po vašem mišljenju teologija hrama može da bude prihvaćena i prosto korišćena u svakodnevnom životu hrišćana, i kakve bi promjene donela?
There are many ways. Perhaps the most pressing concern for everybody now is the state of the world we are living in, the state of the environment, the state of the planet, to use the popular term. And I think Christians have neglected very much any theology of creation in a practical sense. We've had the rather sort of basic statements about, you know, the Lord created the earth and the earth is the Lord's and so forth, and that's fine, no one disputes that. But the more detailed working out is something we need to do. And if we look at the theology of the temple theology, and its wonderful creation covenant, which is the basis of its whole worldview, this creation covenant, they call it the covenant of peace, or the covenant of eternity, the everlasting covenant. This covenant of peace is fundamental to any Christian statement about our role in caring for the creation, living within it, how we see our role as human beings. And that element of temple theology is almost completely neglected. So that's one area, in the environment, Christian creation theology. Another one is looking at this female figure, the lady, because in churches of every description, women have been marginalized. Now, I didn't start with a feminist agenda, and I don't have a feminist agenda, but when I discovered that there was this major female figure in the original temple, and that she was associated with this creation covenant, all sorts of things began to fall into place. So there is a huge area there to explore. For example, this female figure was, if you like, the patron or the mother figure of the high priests. So what does this do to the role of women as priests in the church? This is an extraordinarily difficult one. Now, I followed the debates in my own country, in England. I followed the debates about ordaining women very closely because I had friends involved. Never once was any of this theology mentioned, and it would have enriched the debate considerably. And so in the end, I think the right action was taken, but for the wrong reasons. And we were looking, certainly in England, at the equality laws and things like that, which got nothing to do with theology. They were simply legal issues. But if they had only explored this and the role of women, and indeed the understanding of the role of Mary in the early church, this would have been revolutionary, to put it mildly. So that's another one. And then there's another one which concerns me very deeply, and that it might be quite strange coming from a Protestant, but the way church services, certainly in the West, are changing. The liturgy is being rewritten, elements are dropped from it, all sorts of precious things from Christian history, from our heritage. These are simply being dropped because people do not understand what they are dropping. And I think if we could have a proper study of temple theology so that people knew what this was actually doing, what this was expressing, we should not have these rather impoverished and in some cases almost silly modern liturgies that just do not make sense and are not true to Christianity. I was asked a little while ago an interview for a big church newspaper in England, and one of the questions they asked me was, did I think the church had a future in England? And I replied, it had a future if it rediscovered Christianity. And they published that, and it was quite interesting what the reaction was, because I think many churches have simply lost touch with what they are. And temple theology is a reminder of how far they have come and how much they have lost. And that's a great pity.
Možete li nam reći nešto o pravoslavlju? Kada ste prvi put čuli za pravoslavlje i, da kažemo, stupili u kontakt sa njim i šta je to najznačajnije što ste saznali kroz pravoslavnu hrišćansku tradiciju?
Well, I've known about Orthodoxy for a very long time, obviously, but I didn't know much about it in detail. And I first had proper contact with the Orthodox Church when, quite unexpectedly, I received an invitation from Patriarch Bartholomew to become a part of his symposium concerned with the environment. And then began, well, that was over 20 years ago, and I have then learned a lot about the Orthodox way of doing things, the Orthodox view of the world, and just the Orthodox way of life, and I have learned a huge amount from that. One of the things that I learned straight away is that the Orthodox world has kept its sense of the holy and the sacred. And this was something that I was very much missing in the Protestant West. And this isn't something they talk about, it's just a way of living and a way of being, and that to me was very important. And the first time I was present at an Orthodox liturgy, and that was in England, in the city of Oxford, I watched, and it was a Russian liturgy, but I just watched it. I didn't really understand the words. I was trying to follow the Greek text of the service, and I just watched the movements and I watched what they were doing. This was in 1997, I think. And I thought to myself, I know where this came from, because although I had never been at an Orthodox liturgy before, I recognised that this was the temple. It was the Christian version of the temple, but everything about it was familiar. And the bishop, it was an Episcopal liturgy, the bishop came to me afterwards. He recognised that I was a new face. He was very welcoming, and he said, "This must all have been very strange to you." And I said, "Oh no, it wasn't strange at all. I knew exactly what I was watching." And he was and he said, "Well, how is this?" And we began talking, and he became a very great friend. And I learned from him a lot. He lent me books and things like that. He was a wonderful help and friend. And I was able to work out then the elements in the Orthodox liturgy that are clearly straight from the old temple, the form of worship, everything, the movement of the priests. And it was fascinating. But I needed an Orthodox figure who knew it well, such as that bishop, who was so helpful, so gracious, and that really gave me a grounding, gave me a footing, and I was able then to build and do my own research. But so for me, the Orthodox liturgy, the shape of the churches, what you do, just the movements, everything to me was familiar, and that was wonderful.
Da li ste možda u pravoslavlju pronašli nešto što je bilo vama posebno interesantno dok ste izučavali teologiju hrama?
I am fascinated by the holy wisdom. Now, I realize that this is a fairly controversial element of orthodoxy, and some people aren't happy with it. Maybe some expressions of the idea of the holy wisdom, but the holy wisdom is there and won't go away. And I am very interested indeed in the roots of the tradition of the holy wisdom. Now, I had done quite a lot of research on this from the biblical lens, so history way back. What fascinated me was that so much of this was still there in the Orthodox worldview, in the icons, in just everything. And so that really did fascinate me, and I think this is something that I would like to explore more, particularly to explore with Orthodox people for whom it is a part of their way of life, rather than for me something I have discovered in the course of my academic researches. But this is something very beautiful that I think we must recover and cherish and treasure.
Kako gledate na pravoslavne ikone i na njihovu upotrebu u liturgijskom životu pravoslavlja?
Well, again, I have to look just as an outsider because I have never lived in a world with icons. I just look at them as these wonderful pictures. But I have never, for example, I've never kissed an icon. That is something that a Protestant just would not do. But I contemplate them and I think about them and the meaning of them and the way the icon is made. This to me is a wonderful process, a spiritual process. But I'm also fascinated by the theology that is preserved in the icons that is not so easy to find in written texts. And so I have looked at ancient icons of wisdom or the traditional icons of the Mother of God, all these things. And I say, now what is that symbol? Why is that there? Why is her hand doing this? What is the meaning of this? And this is all fitting in with my studies that have been based on texts. And then suddenly I see that these are part of this living tradition of the icons. And that to me was absolutely wonderful because in Protestant tradition, of course, we don't have anything like icons. We have pictures, but they are not in any way used as part of worship in the way that icons are. So that to me has been a wonderful discovery.
Postoji mišljenje da vaša teologija hrama nosi u sebi potencijal revolucije u praktičnom smislu života hrišćana, ali možda i druge dve monoteističke religije. Da li je to uzbudljivo za vas?
That's a difficult question to answer. It would be wonderful if my studies and my researches were a part of the new growth, new discovery within the churches of many of their treasures and traditions that have been lost. So that would be a wonderful reward really for many, many years of work, but that's not why I've done it. I have done it, I'm afraid, as just a quest for personal, to find out these things. But yes, I think what I have found and what I have been shown by many people, because I have learned from many, many people, does have a possibility to be of use to many Christians. One of the joys of temple studies, and we have a little group called the Temple Studies Group, we meet, and it has become our pattern. We have 4 speakers, and the 4 speakers are always from 4 different branches of the church. So we never have 2 Catholics or 2 Protestants. We always have 1 Protestant, 1 Catholic, 1 Orthodox, whatever it is. And so we can make the point, even in our scholarly meetings, that this is for all Christians, for all parts of the church. And in our most recent symposium, our 10th symposium, we had for the first time, we had a Muslim speaker, so that was lovely, and that again is bringing it to the other religions of the book. I think we've got a lot of work to do exploring this with our Muslim friends. I have just begun a little bit of this, but it's such a huge, huge area to go into. I think it will be very worthwhile going into. We shall learn a lot from each other. I have limited myself so far to Christian elements because that is the world in which I am at home. But there is a great deal more to do.
Ms. Barker, thank you for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Poštovani gledaoci, hvala i vama što ste bili sa nama. Naša večerašnja gošća bila je doktorka Margaret Barker, osnivačica teologije hrama. Prijatno.
Rečnik psihologije Žarka Trebješanina sažima stotina i zamenjuje 50 stručnih knjiga iz različitih disciplina psihologije. Ovakav stručni i sveobuhvatni rečnik psihologije sadrži 5000 pojmova. Rečnik psihologije je dragocen i pouzdan vodič svima i laicima i stručnjacima koji dolaze u kontakt sa psihološkom literaturom.
Da u novoj 2019. vaši poslovi idu bolje. Savremene ideje i tehnika Jovšić Printing Centra grade novu i bogatiju sliku o vašim proizvodima i uslugama, kreiranjem uzbudljivih i modernih rešenja. Srećno u novoj godini i novim poslovima!
U prodaji su nova izdanja Agape knjige. Svi moji putevi vode ka Srbiji, delo francuskog humanitarca Arnaуда Gujona, autobiografije Nikole Tesle i Mihajla Pupina u jednoj knjizi, Agape-Antologija 4, koju čine 12 razgovora po izboru akademika Vladete Jerotića, kao i Zvezdobrojici, autobiografski zapisi Tesle, Pupina i Milankovića o njihovom odrastanju. www.agape.rs.
U prodaji je knjiga Agape-Antologija 3, religija u svetskoj književnosti, autora Aleksandra Gajšeka. U knjizi su objavljeni intervjui iz serijala Agape, u kojima su analizirana dela najznačajnijih autora svetske književnosti. Ep o Gilgamešu, grčke tragedije, Dante, Cervantesov Don Quixote, Šekspir, Goethe, Gogolj, Dostojevski, Tolstoj, Bulgakov, Kafka i Mann. Agape-Antologija 3.
Agape je u ranom hrišćanstvu bila trpeza na kojoj je svako bio dobrodošao. Ovaj davni običaj postao je vremenom simbol univerzalne hrišćanske ljubavi. I danas se zna. Ko veruje da nam je samo ljubav potrebna, njegova je trpeza agape.